Just before dawn on October 29, 1956, paratroopers of the Israel Defense Forces, led by the legendary commander Ariel Sharon, descended into Egypt's Sinai Desert. The paratroopers' goal was to conquer the strategically important Mitla Pass, but the broader objective was to eliminate the threat posed by the Soviet-armed Egyptian military and Egypt's strongman Gamal Abdel Nasser. Israel was not alone in seeking Nasser's defeat. Great Britain and France also wanted to intervene against Nasser, who had just nationalized the economically vital Suez Canal. They only needed a pretext, and Israel provided them with one by attacking Egyptian forces in the Mitla Pass, 20 miles away from the canal. Thus began what is known as the Suez Crisis, the Second Arab-Israeli War. Where did it all begin? The war's origins can be traced to the end of Israel's War of Independence in 1949, when Israel signed armistice agreements with Jordan, Egypt, and Syria. Israel viewed these agreements as precursors to peace, but the Arabs saw them as temporary truces only, leading up to what they called the second round to attack and destroy Israel. Throughout the early 1950s, the Arabs acquired modern weapons, above all fighter jets, which Israel, still laboring under a U.S. arms embargo, could not obtain. The Arab states also backed bands of Palestinian terrorists known as Fedayeen, self-sacrificers, who launched raids against Israeli communities from the West Bank, which was then ruled by Jordan, as well as from the Gaza Strip, ruled by Egypt. In response, Israel formed paratrooper units under Ariel Sharon to retaliate against the Fedayeen raids. Border tensions reached a fever pitch. Still, war seemed unlikely unless a leader emerged who could rally the Arab world and unite it against Israel. That leader was the charismatic Gamal Abdel Nasser, who electrified Arabic-speaking audiences with his fiery rhetoric against the West. After seizing power in July 1952, he portrayed himself as the hero of Pan-Arabism, the notion that all Arab states should unite and form one powerful nation. Nasser also railed against the Zionist entity — he refused to call Israel by its real name — and pledged to fight it. He rejected repeated American and British attempts to broker a treaty with Israel, even though they offered him large pieces of Israel's Negev desert in return. Instead, he intensified Fedayeen attacks and sought advanced weaponry from the West's paramount enemy, the Soviet Union. In September 1955, he succeeded, signing a massive arms deal with the Soviets that included not only hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles, but also modern fighter jets and bombers. Suddenly outgunned by Egypt, surrounded by threats on all sides, Israel's very existence hung in the balance. So believed Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion and IDF Chief of Staff Moshe Dayan. Israel sorely needed an ally, but no country was willing to aid the isolated Jewish state. That is, until 1955, when Nasser started backing Algeria's struggle for independence from France, giving France and Israel a common enemy. Secretly at first, France started providing Israel with arms. A great many arrived, but for Ben-Gurion and Dayan, not fast enough. In another year at most, they estimated, Egypt would be ready to strike. The opportunity to preempt that attack came in July 1956, when Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. Britain and France, which largely owned the canal, were willing to take it back by force, but they needed a pretext. In a secret agreement, Israel committed to land its paratroopers in the Mitla Pass near the canal. This would set off a pre-planned chain of events. Britain and France would issue an ultimatum to both Egypt and Israel to cease threatening the waterway. Both, presumably, would reject the demand, and so give an excuse for a joint Anglo-French expedition to invade Egypt and protect the canal. It was a wild scheme, one that was certain to anger U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who publicly opposed the use of force against Nasser, which is why the French, the British, and the Israelis kept their plan a secret. Until October 29th, when the paratroopers landed in Mitla. At the same time, Israeli ground forces smashed through Egyptian lines in Sinai, and Israel's French-made jets shot Egypt's Soviet-made MiGs out of the sky. Within 100 hours, all of Sinai down to the Suez Canal and all of Gaza lay in Israeli hands. The British and the French had their pretext and offered their ultimatum. Then they failed to act. Eisenhower, feeling betrayed, was furious and warned of serious repercussions if Britain and France went ahead with their scheme. Despite U.S. objections, they did, but only after dallying for 5 full days before invading Egypt, and even then their progress was painfully slow. That gave the U.S. and the UN enough time to condemn the invasion and force the expedition to evacuate Egypt at once. The invading troops retreated in disgrace, and both the British and the French governments fell. Israel, too, was pressured by the U.S. to withdraw its troops, and a first-of-its-kind United Nations peacekeeping force was deployed in Sinai and Gaza. But Israel had eliminated the immediate Egyptian threat and earned itself a decade of relative quiet. Ben-Gurion and Dayan were national heroes, and Israel could focus on absorbing more immigrants, building its economy, and fortifying the Israel Defense Forces to meet the far greater challenge that would come in 1967. I'm Michael Oren, author of 6 Days of War for Prager University.